to talk about board of directors and independent board members, as well as having an advisory committee to the board. So I think maybe it would be helpful if we kind of had an idea of who's in the room. So how many people are on the board of directors for the company that you work for? Okay. How many people have independent board members? Okay. How many people are there? Is there anyone that is an independent board member of a different board? Okay. Okay, so it seems like, are there people that are like service providers too? Okay, all right, perfect. Okay, so we're going to start out a little bit with some introductions of ourselves, talk about what a board is and what an advisory board is, what the roles are, how they fulfill their obligations, and then how to actually establish a board, identify candidates, and then obviously talk about the benefits of having independence. And then we'll hear real life stories from Real Pickles and Gardner Supply. And Cindy also from formerly Gardner Supply, is also an independent member on a variety of other boards. So she'll give a little bit of insight to that also. Do you want to talk about yourself?
Sure. So.
Oh, wait, hold on, it's not
you're-
moving. Sorry. Do we know why it isn't moving up there, but it's moving here? Oh, no. And I just told him that I knew what was going on.
Do we have to just do a change of a shared screen?
Oh, maybe? I don't know. See, like, I moved it to here, and like, it's not moving up there.
Yeah, that's separate ones.
Sorry, everybody. Cindy, do you want to introduce yourself, even though we're having technical difficulties?
Sure. And I can go get someone after Ryan if we need him.
Oh, is that it, maybe?
No, it should be. I'm just trying
Let's
to see
see.
if it'll.
Yeah, see, it's moving there. And I hit like this from the beginning. Oh, what about that? What's that?
Click on from the beginning here, because this is in.
I think we have
yeah.
to do here. I did that.
See,
What
like,
if we do
that's-
this? What does that do? No.
No. Yeah, see, that's not doing anything at all. That's completely frozen.
Yeah, see?
Oh.
Oh. No, that's just because we closed it. Well, the ESOP 101 is showing up. I clicked there. Maybe that's not what I was supposed to do. Maybe close that one?
It's doing something now.
Close.
Hey, we have had
Close.
technical problems in Mildred. Will you back? It's not
Close.
working.
Thank
It's
you.
not showing the presentation.
Is this the one you want?
Yeah.
Computer, but not on the screen. All right, thank you, bye. They're going to send someone down too.
Oh, thank you. Ah! We
There we
figured it out. Okay,
All right.
we got it.
Yeah, so we're all set. So when they come in,
Perfect.
we
I
can
got
just
it.
tell them
This
we're
is
all
where we
set.
need to be.
All right, so Cindy
Thank you.
Turcot, I was with Gardner Supply for 40 years. I worked in I started in data entry actually, and worked in a number of different positions, CFO, COO, and ultimately was CEO. I retired last July. So I am not even a year yet to being retired. But I have also been really involved nationally in the East, locally and nationally. I was the founding chair of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center back in 2001, and still serve on the board. But I've also been the chair of the ESOP Association out of Washington, D.C., and I'm currently the immediate past chair of the foundation, Employee Ownership Foundation out of D.C. So I've been really involved. I'm also involved internationally in employee ownership. And so I've obviously have a passion for it. I serve now on 4 ESOP company boards, and so I'm going to talk about the structure of those boards as a part of this, just because I think you getting as many examples of how boards are set up and what they do as we can is always helpful. So that's a little bit about me.
I'm Brendan Flannelly-King. I'm from Real Pickles Cooperative in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And we formed a cooperative in 2013, and I've been on the board of directors since that time. And I've been a part of our committee that organizes our advisory board. And so we don't have any independent members on our board of directors, but I'll be speaking to our advisory board experience.
And I'm Jeannine Pendergast. I am an ESOP trustee based out of Portland, Maine. I work for Spinnaker Trust. I started my career in public accounting. When I left public accounting, I went to work for a large ESOP-owned company in upstate New York, which was my introduction to ESOPs. And then I moved to Portland, Maine, and now work at Spinnaker Trust. So I think just high-level basics, what is the corporate structure, and kind of what is a board of directors. So high-level, there's shareholders. If it's a public company, it can be anybody that owns shares. In an ESOP, it is essentially the trust. The ESOP itself is the shareholder, and all of the participants are beneficiaries of that trust. And the trustee really holds the role of representing the shareholders or the ESOP participants. And so it's the shareholders' duty to elect the board of directors. The board of directors appoints and oversees the president, CEO, the C-suite, and then the executive leadership team hires and oversees, the mid-level management, which obviously hire and oversees employees. So that kind of is the basic structure. And then, which I didn't put in here, I don't know why I didn't, but an advisory board kind of would be, on the side of the board of directors, assisting the board of directors. So the board is the governing body that is elected by the shareholder. So in an ESOP-owned company, the trustee is actually responsible for electing the board. And it's the board's job to set the strategy, hire the management team, oversee operations, think longer term, not get in the weeds of the company like management, but help guide the CEO and the management team on where do you want to be in 3 years, where do you want to be in 5 years, big picture things. And it's their duty really to protect the interest of the shareholders and try to drive value up for the shareholders. The shareholder, which I don't have in here because we're not talking about trustees per se, but it's the shareholder or the trustee's job to make sure that that board of directors is independent, engaged, and really helping the management team and looking out a number of years to try to figure out, do we need to put some investments into the company? What do we need to do to make sure that the company continues to grow so that we don't get stuck on our heels if our largest customer disappears or that type of stuff. The shareholder is not running the company. We don't sit on the board of directors as the trustee. We're just making sure that the board is actually doing what they should be doing so that the share value continues to go up for the ESOP participants. The advisory board is a group of individuals that provides expertise and helps the board of directors without having the actual legal and fiduciary obligation that a board member would have. So they don't vote on the board, but they share knowledge and skills that people on the board might not have to help the board make informed decisions. Oh, I thought you were going to say something, Cindy. So the role of the board, I kind of, talked about this, but here's a little bit more detail. And like I said, the board members actually do have a legal and fiduciary obligation to the company and to the shareholders. So this is just a side note. Anyone that is on a board, you should definitely make sure that the company has insurance to protect you. Because you are actually the body that is voting and making the decision. So if something happened or there was a lawsuit or something, they would, you need to make sure you have insurance to protect the board members. The board also is in charge of mergers and acquisitions. If the company is interested in acquiring another company, that is something that the board should consider and hire, if they need to, hire a financial advisor or legal counsel to help them with due diligence and consideration about whether they want to, whether that acquisition is a good decision for the company. That is not something that the ESOP trustee does or the shareholders. Also, on the flip side, if the company was considering selling to a third party, again, that is a board of directors decision and responsibility, not a trustee or shareholder responsibility. So that is important because I think a lot of people don't realize that that is something that the board needs to do. The advisory board, like I said, they don't have that fiduciary obligation to the company because they're not actually on the board of directors and they don't hold that role. They are really there to support the leadership team and the board in the ways that the board essentially is asking them to. So sometimes, it will be someone that has a lot of experience in the ESOP space, like Cindy, or sometimes it's, someone that the company really needs to increase their marketing presence, and they don't have anyone on the board, they don't have a marketing department, and they're just trying to figure out, how can we improve our marketing. A lot of times they'll try to set up a advisory board and find somebody to help in that respect. Even just kind of, to help analyze and do we need to hire someone for marketing, to help the company just on projects or, different ways to improve. So the board, how do they fulfill their duties, and kind of how do we assess that they're doing their job? We need to make sure that all of the members are actively engaged, meaning they prepare for the meeting, that management team provides information to them before the meeting to review so that, it can be a productive meeting. We like to see a very diverse and independent group of board members. If you have, 5 board members and they're all of the same exact mindset, you're really not going to get as much out of your board as ideally you could. Having different perspectives, bouncing ideas off of each other, at times it's not comfortable, but that is really what you will need to try to figure out what do we need to do to continue to evolve, to stay competitive, to stay relevant, to continue to be a successful company. And I think a big part of what the responsibility of the board is to help identify risks that maybe the management team is doing their day-to-day jobs, they're involved in things, again, like in the weeds, day-to-day, they're doing their job. The board will come in and it's their job essentially to identify any risks of the company, help them manage pitfalls, really kind of look ahead and get them out of their day-to-day to try to determine if they should think of things differently, different ways to help with succession planning. A lot of times people are afraid to share their knowledge and their roles and responsibilities as they are maturing and getting toward retirement. It's the exact opposite, essentially, of what you should be doing as a manager, but a lot of times it just isn't really comfortable because you're afraid that the company's not going to need you if you give your responsibilities and teach people things. But I think once people kind of get over that, they realize that, hey, you know what? If I give these things and help, bring up the management team below me, I have more time to look at bigger picture things, help avoid the pitfalls and work on the risks and things that the board has identified since the last meeting. And making sure, again, the board is making sure that succession is always a topic of conversation. I think far too often we see succession planning start way too late. Succession often takes 5 or 10 years. Sometimes, you think, Joe is going to be my successor, and you find out a year in that it's not really working out. And if you only start doing that a year before you want to retire, you're going to encounter some issues. And then we also like to see that the board is, has their own sort of performance review where they kind of assess each other and the individuals assess themselves, so that, we'll talk a little bit about how long people stay on boards, and just so that, you can make sure that you have the most engaged board and helpful board. It's just like any job or anything. Sometimes people's it's time to turn over new people on the board, and I think that those annual assessments are very helpful to figure out where people are and how gauge their interest really still on staying on the board. And then again, people that are qualified to sit on the board, a lot of times people will want someone in their industry or, kind of like a related field. Sometimes we see if companies are involved in kind of like a networking or industry group, that they will find people from like the other part of the country or someone that's not a direct competitor, but they actually are in the same line of business. And so I think looking for people that have good communication skills, interpersonal skills, that will be able to work with the other people on the board and your management team. I think people that have experience and understanding of corporate governance, to make sure that people aren't getting into the weeds, but, supporting people, the management team as much as they should support them, just, to make sure that you have people that understand kind of where they should insert themselves and where it's not necessary or wanted, really. And then, you know, just making sure that the person has the time to commit, so that you make sure that they remain engaged. So how your board needs to be structured. So your bylaws will actually often detail the number of directors, the term of directors, and so I think that you need to look to your bylaws to make sure that you're in compliance with what you should, your board should look like. Oftentimes, if independent board members are required, that will also be in the bylaws. Bylaws are easy to amend also, so if you want to increase your board or add independent members, you can always amend those bylaws. Oftentimes, after an ESOP, as trustee, we require at least one independent board member. Most of our companies, I will say, have never had a board, so it's foreign to a lot of our clients. So usually we will have them start maybe with a board of 3. So usually our first-time boards will see, 3 to 5 directors, and at least, like I said, 1 independent. It's helpful if you create kind of job descriptions and or charters for different committees that you might have on the board, so that when you approach someone and ask them if they want to be on the board, they know what you're expecting of them. And I think a lot of times if you don't know what you're expecting and they don't know what you're expecting, sometimes, there's a difference. You find out after the fact that there's a difference in expectations, and it doesn't, go as well as it could. Again, diversity, I think, is very important, from, all different aspects of, the business community, gender, race, age, all of that, I think is very beneficial to have, obviously people look at things from different directions, so that you can lead the company as best as possible. Also, I think when people are looking and saying, well, how are we supposed to figure out who we should ask to be on the board? I always tell people to look at and think about, where do you have holes in the company? Do you not have a strong HR or P&C group or department? Like, you could, get somebody to help you out there, to help you kind of figure out, like, how do we structure? Do we actually need someone in this role? And fill those gaps with a board member, and then, you take over from there to, hopefully, obviously, grow the company and grow your success. Potential candidates, again, we have a list of people that have served on boards, so we often give people names when they're looking for independent board members. But just looking, using your network, using other people's network that you may know, that are in the business space, trusted advisors, peer groups, like I had said before, adjacent industries to yours, just looking for someone. Our definition of independent is they've never been paid by the company. So unfortunately, if it's a banker, a CPA, or a lawyer, those people aren't independent in our mind. And then also can't be related to anyone in management or the former owner of the company. So sometimes that is hard for people to say, I don't even know where to start. So like I said, we sometimes will give names, and then as we're talking to them, they think like, oh yeah, you know what? I went to the VEOC meeting and I met this person that was very interesting. And that's a great way to find people too, networking at things like this. And then some benefits, I think you'll hear from Cindy and Brendan, but it helps to avoid conflict of interest, fresh perspective. A lot of our ESOP companies are, 30, 40, 50 years old. A lot of the companies have longevity of employees. So a lot of times it's like the only place or one of the only places that people have worked. And so it's difficult sometimes for those individuals to think outside the box because this is just how we've always done things. So getting outside perspective and experiences really can be beneficial. And expertise, like I said, that the company just doesn't have. And I think also from an ESOP perspective, it's confusing when you actually establish an ESOP and set up an ESOP to your employees. They don't really understand it. They don't understand what the difference is with management before and after the ESOP transaction. People hear that the selling shareholder that, I've worked for this person for 30 years and are they just going away? What's going to happen? That just creates fear. And so I think, making sure that you have a strong board, that employees, to the extent that you're comfortable, understand who's on the board. I think when you start to have structure like that and explain to them that this group is here to continue to help the current management team that you have known and worked for however many years, that will help them with trust and confidence in the board and where the company is moving going forward. And now we're going to hear from Cindy.
All right. So I'm just going to go through sort of how we're actually structured so that you get a sense of it, and for all of my boards, how we're structured, how we got to where we are. But I think with Gardner Supply, I think it's important to know a little bit about our history because our company started in 1983, but we started our ESOP in 1987, and our owner was in his late 30s then. So we weren't doing it for ownership succession, we were doing it for shared wealth, and he wanted us to be invested in the company that we worked for. So a little bit different than most ESOPs. And so we just bought little bibs and bobs as we went, and we got up to the 19%, and then we finally did our first leverage, which means we took out a loan from the bank to get to the 30, and that was the first time we got any tax incentives, or the selling shareholder got any tax incentives, and then we did it again at 45%. So it wasn't until 2009 that we actually became 100% ESOP owned, and then it was about ownership succession. So the reason that I bring that up is because it goes through why we have, why we did what we did in terms of structure. So because our owner's name was Will Rapp, and Will had majority shares until we got to 2009. So when it came to a vote, he was going to win no matter what anyways. So we didn't focus a lot on having the structures that we have post. So back then, we had an external trustee. It was a local bank. And remember, we were in the 80s then. There wasn't all these professionals that are here to help us, trustees, that we were sort of on our own. We worked, and that particular bank, had some experience with ESOPs, but not that much because it was such an early adopter. So we found ourselves really doing a lot of the work that the trustee would do anyways to make sure things were being done right. From a board of directors standpoint, it was our founder, our CEO, and our COO, which at that time was myself. And we were internal. Again, everything we were going to do, Will was going to sign off as shareholder. It didn't matter. But we did have advisors at that point, and those advisors were like our lawyer and our accountant. Like, it wasn't, we didn't have a lot of industry necessarily, but just making sure that we were focusing on the right things because we were a fledgling business for the first part of our lives. Once we went to 100%, that's when we got really serious about having the right governance. And for us, that meant, for me, I'll speak for myself, I wanted to make sure we didn't have people wearing multiple hats. So we decided at the point of external trustee to go internal because we felt like we had the expertise. I had a lot of experience having worked with a lot of different companies and been to a lot of conferences. I actually then resigned as a board member, went up, and I was a trustee, and then we had two others. The next was the board of directors, and at that point, our legal board, we did keep it, and it still is, well, I believe it still is, I don't know if it changed since I left, but 3 board members, and that was because we were nervous about having external board members telling us what to do, and that were they gonna change our structure, were they not gonna like the ESOP? It just didn't work out that way. Like, you're getting people who are excited about the model you're in, they decide they wanna be on your board. So originally, we had the founder, the CEO, and which wasn't me at the time, and 1 external. So we had the founder with a foot on both sides. And ultimately, as time passed, we now have the CEO and 2 external board members. So when I became CEO, I went off as a trustee and I went into the board role. So we never had any of our trustees being the same as our board. So we still have the 3 boards, and then, but the difference with our advisory board is we really beefed up our advisory board. We have an employee rep from our ESOP committee that attends the board meetings, and then we had our past CEO before me, the founder, and then 2 externals that had industry expert. There's now 3 actually. Well, I'm sorry, 2 externals, and then we had the 2 that were actual board members. We actually like the structure of 3. It's simple, it's easy to get signatures, things like that, and the fiduciary responsibility is less, but the advisory boards do not act any different at a board meeting. If we're going to get yelled at, it's going to be by all of them, or if we're going to get praised, it'll be the same. So that's how we did it. And then you do have that advisory board that you can pull people in to be your legal board members once those legal board members want to move on, or we want them to move on, whichever. So in terms of structure of our meetings, we do quarterly board meetings. We do a dinner the night before, everybody flies in. And we have all-day board meetings, generally 8 to 3. And again, the advisory board members are no different than our board members, so they attend everything. We do have 3 committees. One is an audit committee that's reviewing the audit. We all meet together with management and them, and then we go off the call, and the audit committee meets alone with the auditors to make sure there's no issues. Nominating committee for board. If there's a board seat open, they're the ones who are out there trying to find people for our board. And then the compensation committee for our CEO. For their compensation. And so they happen as needed. And I wanted to say one other thing about our board members, because it really varies, but management attends the entire board meeting until the end. And then at the end, we go into what's called executive session. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, I would then, as the CEO, go into executive session with all the board members. They give me feedback. And actually, the employee rep leaves also, because it's meant to be the external board members giving me feedback on how the meeting went, anything I needed to focus on, and then I left and they met amongst themselves. The chair then would meet with me afterwards and say if there was anything they needed to communicate to me based on them being alone. It gives them time to be honest about how things went, good or bad. So that's how we were structured.
Cindy, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Does the advisory board stay for the
Yeah,
executive
advisory
session?
board. Yep.
Okay.
They are all the same except the employee rep, and that's mainly because I'm being, getting a performance review kind of at the board meeting, and it's not appropriate for them to be there. So then let's just talk a little bit about the boards that I serve on. The first one, this was actually a trustee. All of my boards that I'm on have external trustees, not internal trustees, and all of those trustees require that they have at least 1 external member. So this particular board, I was the first member that was the external person. And so that has evolved since then, but it was me and basically the management team and prior CEO. And so and that was great. I could provide, they were new ESOP, so there's lots of ESOP questions, and I could provide all that information and what they should think about. Plus I was a CEO, help them get their ESOP committee started, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that I think all boards need industry experts. So eventually they brought on 2 experts in the industry that they were in, and that just, for me, it transforms the meeting, because those are the people that know how to grow your business in your particular industry. So I feel like it's much richer since they've been added. So That's a change, and you'll see that with each of my boards, that after I joined, I was very much an advocate to get an industry person on. So I think it's much better. In general, we always meet quarterly, but in general, they're half Zoom, half on site. You know, the COVID world changed things. Everything used to be on site. And they're generally half-day meetings, although, you know, that we have strategic, like we have one coming up where we have an all-day strategic meeting, and the next day is our board meeting. So it just depends. The company number 2, also trustee required an external. I was the first one. And now it's currently just similar, CEO, founder, me, and then one board member in the industry that came in after me. Meet quarterly on site for half a day. So pretty straightforward. That one's pretty simple. My more complicated one, actually, and requiring more time, is company number 3, and that was one external board member and the founders, and they were the original directors. So they became 30% owned before I joined, and then I joined before they became 100%. So, and they've since added an industry expert also, but I was there to help them with the change it over to 100%. And they also meet quarterly, but the difference with this board is they have 2 committees that are very active. One is finance and one is people and culture. And they meet 6 to 10 times a year, and they ask for a lot of input in terms of helping them. I would call their management team sort of an immature management, not meaning immature acting, but just that they grew up within the business. So having outside people is really important for this group. And so I spent a lot more time with this particular group. And then the last one, I'm new to that board. They already had 3 industry experts on their board. What they didn't have was an ESOP expert, culture person, that sort of thing. They have a great culture. It's just I bring a different flair or a different expertise, plus obviously I bring the CEO and finance side. And they have 2 face-to-face meetings, shorter updates on their Zoom meetings. But what I do want to, from an external person, I probably have at least 4 to 6 meetings separate from the board meetings where they contact me. Probably in the last month, can you look at our HR manual? Can you help me with what the structure of our finance team should be? Can you look at our TPA report? Because I wanted to make sure another set of eyes is on it. All those kinds of things I get asked for in between. So, and that's true for other board members too. They're being asked to, like, you know, we're interviewing a strategic planning consultant. Would you meet with them? That kind of thing. So you can always expect to be, that's what you're paid for. And we are paid board members, so all of our external board members, not internal, all external board members are paid. In our case, the advisory boards are not paid differently, but they are paid, and our chair is the only one that's paid an extra amount. And that's pretty much true, I think, for all of my boards. Well, at least in most cases, the chair is paid a little bit more. So that's sort of an overview on how they're structured. Elias? You mean how much is it? Yeah. Or yeah? Yeah, well, the NCEO, National Center for Employee Ownership, out of San Francisco, actually does a board compensation study. I mean, a board, compensation study. Mm-hmm. So you can get it there. In general, for most of my boards, they're in the range of 15 to 20,000 per year. And I have one that's lower than that because they don't meet as long or as often, so it's less than that. But that's in general. And then now there are some people that are paying their boards more than that, but in everything I've seen and the people that I've talked to, and I get interviewed every so often by people that are interested, and they were in that range. I don't know if you're seeing the same in terms of range of pay, but for ESOP companies.
I would say that's probably the range that we see too, except if the company is a very large company,
right. It would be different.
It will be a little bit different. But generally, ESOP companies are not paying anywhere near like what public companies would pay.
That's right.
Sometimes we'll see some sort of synthetic equity type thing given out, but not often. So that means that oftentimes, like you'll hear if somebody works for a public company, that part of their pay is through stock options. So it's similar to a stock option. It's, you know, there'll be a plan that sometimes it's called a SARS plan, stock appreciation right plan, that the ESOP company will have that as a part of their structure. And sometimes, but like I said, not often, some of those SARs will be given to board members.
I always have to think about when I was CEO, if we were paying 30 or 40,000, which some companies are, I was like, am I really getting $200,000 worth of value? Or, if you have 5 board members, you're paying that much. That's a lot of money. So part of me, for me, it's like, are you getting that amount of value? And so for me, when I look at that 15 to 20,000, even when it was gardeners, and how many people we had, I felt like I was getting enough value to compensate. And people will take the positions. They're taking the positions, so they're obviously okay with it at some level. Any other questions for me? I know we're going to open up to some other questions Jeannine's going to ask us, but anything else pressing? All right, Brendan, you're on.
All right, hello. Just a little background on Real Pickles. The company was started in 2001. We make fermented organic vegetables, all sourced within the region of the Northeast, from Maine to Pennsylvania. And it was founded as a sole proprietorship, and we converted to a worker cooperative in 2013. The conversion involved 5 members, including the 2 previous owners and 3 new employees. And at this moment right now, we're in founder transition, so those 2 founding founders of the business are on their way out or out already. And currently we have 15 owners out of about a 23-person staff, so not everyone has chosen to be an owner. Ownership is voluntary. And our board of directors governs and oversees the general manager. That's a board of directors of 9 people who are all member owners. We don't have any external input on our board of directors. Those board of directors meetings are generally open to all staff to attend. And we occasionally have executive sessions when we're doing sort of general manager review stuff. When we formed the cooperative, we created a board of advisors, which was basically just pulling in all the sort of informal relationships that the founders and other people at the business had that were, advice, that we'd go to for advice on various things. And we sort of balanced it, meet all the needs of our business, making sure we had someone who was who had experience with co-ops, and a financial person or people, food systems people, and just general business experience and management experience. I think that's sort of the structure stuff. Yeah.
The board of advisors formed in 2014 with 9 members.
Mm-hmm.
Did you pay those?
That's.
They're pretty small.
Yeah, no, we still do not pay our advisors. It's sort of a continuation of informal relationships, and as like a very small mission-driven business, there are people who are interested in offering us that service because of what we do, not because of what we could pay them. We do give them pickles, but but we couldn't do that during the pandemic because we can't give someone pickles over Zoom. And our board of directors, just to respond to the other pay question about directors, so that's all members, and we set our pay at sort of an average wage throughout the business, and we decide at the end of every year whether or not we can afford to pay our board of directors. So sometimes we get paid and sometimes we don't. And as I mentioned before, our membership is voluntary, so we have people on staff who are not owners, and we have some who are. And our board of directors, let's see, is made up only of members, and the board of directors is elected by the members. Every year we have 3 seats that expire, and so every year there's a potential slight change to the board of directors, but some continuity going through. We have 1 seat on our board of directors that's reserved for a new person, so we always have one sort of new voice, just to help keep the diversity of voices on the board. And I think I mentioned all this already, except the committees. So we have 3 committees on our board. One is sort of the culture piece, worker ownership, and one is setting personnel policy. The board actually is the one to officially set it, but the committee is developing all of the recommendations. And then we have our Board of Advisors Committee, which is organizing, managing the relationships with our advisors, and holding meetings. So just a few more things about our Board of Advisors. As Jeannine mentioned, it's a resource for our Board of Directors. For us, it's also a resource for our General Manager. We have a lot of experience on that board that both the board and management would want to tap. So we try to meet twice a year. Often we're only ending up meeting once a year. We choose our advisors. The Board of Advisors Committee chooses who's on. We do not have, we have a term limit, but we don't exercise it for the most part, so we haven't had a lot of turnover. And we've tried to collect the advisors to represent customers, investors, vendors, farmers, and longtime informal business advisors. So we want to make sure we're filling all those gaps, as Jeannine mentioned, that we have, and getting good outside perspective from a variety of different places. The specific areas of experience that we look for are cooperative development, natural foods wholesale, food production, finance, food systems thinking, community business, and nutrition. And generally for all our advisors, we want them to have skills in organizational management and mission-driven organizations, and be familiar with best practices and strategic planning experience. I think that.
So I have a couple questions. If anyone has questions, we obviously welcome you to ask them whenever, but I just wanted to, I have a couple questions for Cindy and Brendan that can hopefully tease out some more information from them. So I know that Cindy, you had said that you at Gardner Supply have a nominating committee, and it's their responsibility to identify new potential board members. I guess, can you explain a little bit about, how you determine who's on the nominating committee and what steps the nominating committee takes to try to find those members?
Yeah, for all of our committees, they're generally, the board sort of volunteers to be on each of the committees. And you sort of have people that have strengths in different areas, so you almost can probably pick who was the people that picked each of these different ones. But our nominating committee, in particular, the last time that we needed to find somebody with industry expertise, specifically e-commerce, because we're gardeners.com, we started as a cataloger and obviously became more digital. So we were looking for someone in that space. And we have someone on our board who's has done a lot of being a CEO, flips the company, starts it again, does it again. So he had a lot of context. He loves our model, but that wasn't what he lived by. So he was a great board member because he brought great expertise. But he's the one who went out there and gave us a slate of people that we would have just never even known. We found this great, the person that we ended up getting came from Crocs, and they were their VP of e-commerce, so he was a great add to our advisory board and brought just tons of expertise. But he basically brought us a slate and went out there and just looked for people. And but if we didn't have him on the board, we would have just had to feather out to all of our contacts and say, hey, who do you know that might be able to help us? Which is what I think he did also. Prior to that, it would have been contacts that we already knew and thought would be good additions, and keeping your eyes open. But we really needed national people. We didn't really have the expertise locally for what we were looking for. So most of the new people are coming nationally. So it's just finding those people that know people, and you just keep the process going. Mm-hmm. And actually, he brought us one that we got, and then that didn't work out. And so that person is the one who gave us the one we actually ended up hiring. So it's funny how it weaves out. Yeah, it weaves out. And then it's like retirees versus people that are working. You know, we were looking for somebody younger, and it's hard because they have full-time jobs. You know, you end up with people who are retired because they have the time to give you, right? But it's hard to find people, and then younger people that have the experience. We were just trying to have diversity within our group, so. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. And Brendan, can you give us an idea of what you do at Real
Yeah,
Pickles?
I definitely think that the like sort of secondary connections in your network are where you find these people. We maybe have a couple people on our board who are direct connections with staff or board of directors members, but a lot of it is someone else connects you, and just getting out there and reaching into your network and asking. Is how
And
you find
industry
people, yeah.
conferences, for
Yep,
sure,
for
in
sure,
your
right here,
field,
yeah.
right?
And Brendan, how do you determine who the new employee on the board of directors is?
Well, we're a pretty small business. Like when we started, so we have a 9-person board, but we started with 5, so it was just the next person who was an owner for a long time. And then we have elections. There's elections every year, and that's just one of the factors we have to consider when electing, is to make sure that someone, that person could already be there in any given year. And often they have. We haven't ever had to change our decision to meet that requirement.
And you may have said this, but does the person have to be an owner?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, got it. And then once you kind of identify, what is the interview process like? Do you want to ask the question before that?
No, just 3 people every year. So there's 3 terms that are rotating, so every year, yeah. And they're 3 years long.
Yeah, and so, Cindy, maybe we can stay on that topic before? Like, what sort of terms and when are the terms kind of staggered so that you don't have like a whole
Yeah.
brand-new board? How does it work for all of your?
For gardeners, we used to have a 3-year term, and then we just never we weren't great at keeping up with it. So we went to annual terms just to say, every year, let's look at it. Do we have the right people? Just, is somebody ready to go off, retirement, whatever, they're done, or that we're ready to make a change with someone. So we just moved to annual to make it easier. Every year, we do our annual board, and every year, we do our officers. And that we were better at that than doing terms and trying to keep track of everybody and who's staggered and all that. But most of my other boards are a term. Around 2 years, some are 3, and somebody's better than I was at keeping track of it all, but they do try to stagger it so that we have terms. But you do have to recognize when it's time for somebody to leave, and hopefully people self-recognize it, but we, on one of my boards, we had someone, it was time for them to go, and we had to have the hard conversation, so the chair had that conversation to say, it's time for you to go, but I'm hoping that I'll know when I need to go, so, but for now, that's how it works.
So kind of along with that, do you both have, like evaluations, annual evaluations to kind of maybe get that person to be self-aware that?
Yeah. We
Maybe
do
it's
had
like
a
that.
performance review that we did, and, but we did it every couple of years, and it was okay. It went to the chair, and then the chair would go from there, and also identify where the board was frustrated that they felt like they weren't getting what they needed from management or whatever. So it was a
Yeah.
way to identify that. Again, I would call us consistent in doing those performance evaluations.
Yeah, we do not have, certainly not on our advisors who are giving us their time for free. We don't evaluate them.
Yeah.
But, we do have to, we don't have evaluations for our board of directors, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot since I got here to this conference for some reason. Yeah.
I actually want to add one thing, though, a reminder that the trustee is who approves the board members, not the nominating committee or the board. It is the trustee, so in at least half of my at least half of my meetings, the trustee is at the meeting. So the trustee is also at that meeting to see if the board is doing their work. And and also at Gardner's, we would have the trustee come in and talk about the valuation and talk about what their process was, because the board doesn't discern the value, the trustee does, but at least they can talk about their process and how did it go, and why was that, and just not to get feedback or challenge, but more just to say that the process happened, so that the board was seeing the strength of the trustee also.
That's just for ESOPs though, right?
Just for
Yes,
ESOPs.
so the
Yeah, I'm sorry.
ESOP
Yeah.
governance is kind of circular because it's our job to elect the board, but it's also the board's job to hire it. So we elect the board and monitor the board, but it's also the board's job to hire and monitor the trustee. So that's a lot of times we will talk about the diligence process, talk about, you know, really kind of how the year went with the administration, and things like that, as kind of, you know, again, making sure that we're all understanding what we're doing, what each other are doing, and allow the board to essentially, you know, make sure that they're giving them some insight as to what we have done, to help them analyze whether they want to continue using us as the trustee.
For those of you that are worker co-ops, ESOP is regulated by ERISA, so we have to follow certain rules that are, you know, that we all follow, and that's why they're all very similarly they're similarly structured. So all of my boards are ESOPs, not worker co-ops.
Is the trustee employed by the ESOP?
No, so for an ESOP, you can have an internal trustees, like Cindy was saying that they have at Gardner, so it can be employees of the company can serve as trustee, and typically those people are not paid, or you can hire an external trustee. And if the person's external, you can either hire an institutional trustee, like myself, I work for Spinnaker Trust, we're a corporation, we serve as ESOP trustee, or you could hire an individual. And there's, you know, a bunch of individuals that serve as ESOP trustees also. So we're hired by the board to be the trustee of the ESOP trust, because it's a retirement plan that is a trust, and so it needs to have a trustee.
Could you just talk a little bit about the role of the chairman of the board compared to the other board members?
Sure, I can do that. I'm the president of the board at Real Pickles, and, you know, we can sort of set roles and responsibilities for our officers. I set the agendas for meetings, and I don't necessarily facilitate or oversee a meeting. And I'm sort of the, you know, the holder of our priorities and what we're doing over the course of the year, making sure that we're accomplishing our goals.
In our case, the chair is, in all cases, the chair is who is working with the CEO. In our case, the CEO, I think in all cases are not the CEO. So they're, who the CEO is reporting to, so they meet more regularly. So when I was CEO, I met every 3 weeks with the chair, and then we talked about what was happening currently in the business, and then we would set the agenda together, and then together we, and then at the meeting, though, I ran the meeting. And it really varies. I would say half of my meetings are run by the CEO, or maybe 3/4 of them, and one, I think, is run by the chair. So it really depends. And that's, again, that leadership team that I said was more immature than the other, that is where the chair runs the meeting. But everywhere else, the CEO runs it, but the chair works on the agenda with them for the most part.
And yeah, I also work directly with our general manager to monitor our agenda and make sure we're talking about the most important things.
Yeah. And my performance review is done by the chair, was done by the chair.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases, the chair will have a higher compensation than the other board members, because, like in Cindy's case, once a month or more, this person is dedicating time to the company, so they will obviously get paid some more money.
Was there another question out there?
Sure.
Can you speak more about, when you said that when you opened up to outside board members, there were some fears that went along with it. What were those fears about, like, letting go of that internal control, right, and allowing people to go, outside of it?
Yeah, my fear was that they were going to tell us we needed to sell. You know, that they came from, like this guy, the person who found us, this really great e-commerce person, he was the flipper, he did all the flipping companies. And he's enamored with employee ownership. But that's not what he did. But he was enamored with what we were doing. And so I have no fear now of him being one of our legal board members. But I was like, oh my God, if there's 2-1, they get to vote that we are no longer an ESOP. And that wasn't what our goal was. And so it was all made up in our heads. You're finding board members that are the right people for your business. And so all of our board members have been very supportive of our model. Now, if something happened and, really negative to our business and we had to sell, fine. But that wasn't, our goal was to try and stay employee-owned sort of infinitely unless things change. So that was the fear for me. I didn't care about anything else except that. I was like fearing that they were going to immediately change us, and it just doesn't work that way. Yes.
How large of a company was Gardner's at the time that you brought in external board members? And what proportion of employees were also employee owners?
So for us, I don't know, we were probably, I don't know what we were at that time, but we probably had close to 200 employees at that point. When we started our ESOP, we had 30. And then we had probably 200 that were in the ESOP at that time. And all of our employees, if they work 1,000 hours, all employees are included, even seasonal. But they have to work 1,000 hours and they have to stay, year after year. But yeah, everybody's eligible to be in the ESOP, whether you're year-round or not.
Yeah, so one of the differences between the ESOP and the co-op is the ESOP, as long as you are an employee and you earn wages and meet other qualifications, like you've been there long enough, you become a member of the ESOP and it's 100% funded by the company. Whereas in a co-op, you are making the decision, you're having to put some money in to become an owner.
And some co-ops do have mandatory membership.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But you definitely still have to buy in, although
Yeah.
that varies dramatically between different businesses.
So can we talk about the interview process and kind of did you have any interviews where you realized this person isn't going to be a good fit?
I'm not sure that I can speak to that as well. I think our network, we sort of knew we wanted all the people that we asked. So, yeah, we didn't have that experience, but.
And you had said that your advisory board hasn't really changed, so.
Yeah, we've added 2 new members, and both have been successful. One was a personal connection, though, so was well vetted beforehand.
When we did our interviews, it was, we did multi-layer, but because I did the interviewing along with the board member, and then it went to the trustees, and remember, we're internally trustees, so they all interviewed also. So, but I'll tell you, one of them was a great on resume, but when we met with her, she came late to the interview, didn't apologize. This is all through Zoom. She lived in California. She goes, oh, I might be able to attend some of the meetings. I'm not sure, because I'm in California. And she was just arrogant through the whole meeting about how maybe she already thought she was so great that it would be, but that was it. Like, no, that was a no, because we need a cultural fit too. And so, we had to find the right person. The last group we met with, we actually found 2 really good ones. One was this e-commerce person. The other was like a operational and finance person, and we loved her, but we're going to wait because we didn't need that talent right now. We first needed this talent, and when I was leaving, we were losing some of that talent, so my guess is they may try to bring her in at some point. So you just sort of have these people waiting, and you keep them in your Rolodex and wait and see. But yeah, it's all about, they have to be the right person for who you are, and they have to be willing to give you the time.
And do you use the advisory board as a feeder to your board of directors, or are some of your board members, they've never been on the advisory board or connected
Yeah,
with
all of
Gardner's
our
before?
board members came from advisory board.
Okay.
That were external.
Yep. Okay.
Can I say just one
yeah.
thing about, just generally about the advisory board, is that it's been, forming an advisory board was really important for our sort of leadership transition process, just to take all the connections and networks that the founders had and sort of move it into other people in the business, other directors. It's, being able to, for myself, as someone coming in to leadership, it's been very valuable to have that resource there. So I highly recommend it.
And can you talk about, I don't know, some stories or examples of positive things that you've gotten from either advisory or board members, and maybe some not so great stories? I don't know if you have any, but,
Well,
are there
my
any
great story-
situations where they have made things more difficult or not?
Well, my good one was that my succession plan, and it was a 2-year plan, and I was working, both with the internal person, but my chair was like invaluable to help me through it, because I was there 40 years. Like, it was traumatic for me to leave, and how do I do it in the best possible way? And he coached me. We also hired a coach to work with us, the two of us, as we went through it, to share how it was for us. And because my worries were different than my successor's worries, right? She was coming in, I was going out, and I was like, at times, and emotionally, it was really difficult to separate. So that would be a good story about how they really helped us. A bad story is really, we had someone who was on our board that just, she would make her point over and over and over, and you'd be like, all right already, we heard you. It was like, that was where it was hard to manage in the moment. And if you tried to move it on, she had to complete her thought, and it was just like really hard. And so that was where you had to work outside of the meeting to say, we need you to be a better listener, like more concise, all that kind of stuff. And the chair dealt with most of that.
I would say in terms of, so, not paying our external advisory board and not giving a lot of feedback to them, or not wanting to criticize them, we really try to structure and tailor our meetings and facilitate them to maximize what we can get out of them. And because they're longer term relationships, we know them and we know what this advisor is going to respond to and what they're not going to respond to. We've definitely had experiences where we ask questions that are really important to us, and there's nothing there for them to give. And so we sort of figured out over time the best questions to ask, the right things to bring to our advisors, and just preparing for meetings is half of the benefit of having our advisory board. We put a lot of work into making sure they're informed and thinking about the questions we're asking. And
That's a
that
really good
process.
point, is to
Yeah.
make sure you're not there to report to them. You need to get that value, that $100,000 value out of them. And so on our agendas, sometimes we even put, this is the question we want you to come prepared to, or we want you to tell us on the outside world what's happening in this regard.
Yeah.
Sometimes we did that, and that was, but it's like knowing what you want to get out of them. Otherwise, we're just spending all this time like telling them about our business. What
Yeah.
we should be getting from them, not.
And we report to our advisory board once a quarter, even though we're only meeting once or twice a year. We just try and keep them informed generally of what's happening at Real Pickles.
So does your advisory committee comes to your board meeting?
They do, not to our board meeting, but we hold a meeting for our advisor, like our board comes and the advisors
Okay.
come and we're all there together.
But the board has a separate meeting from the advisors?
Yeah, the board meets separately monthly.
Okay.
And then once or twice a year, we bring the advisors in specifically for a very carefully facilitated item to get the most out of all those people who are coming so far.
Yeah.
And all the time we spend preparing for the meeting.
Yep.
So do you work at all with the advisory, or people within the company work with any of the advisory members on projects or anything outside of that
Yeah,
meeting?
it's usually fairly small scale, but if we have a question that's co-op related, we'll reach out to our co-op advisors and get some feedback from them, maybe have a phone call or a specific finance question for financial advisors. We'll tap them outside of meetings for sure, and that's very valuable.
I'll add one other thing about extra time, whether it's a CEO searches take a lot of time if you're, mine was a succession, so it wasn't like that. But when we've had to do it for other board members, or when we've had to do a heavy lift for whatever reason, for a project or whatever, we then sometimes get paid more than what we got, just because we just put in 40 hours to hire a CEO. Like, that's above and beyond. Like, I have a contract and that says, you're going to have 4 meetings a year and, let's say, 16 hours of work in addition. But if it was 75 hours, then you need to look at whether or not you need to pay more to your board for that work.
And we're definitely monitoring that, as that we're not asking too
Yeah.
much of our
Yeah.
unpaid board of advisors, so.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we're getting close to the end here. So I think, obviously, from this session, one size does not fit all when it comes to board members, board size, advisory members, whether you even have an advisory board. Independence, I think, rarely is a detriment. It's, like Cindy said, very scary. For most of our selling shareholders, it's very scary because they have never had a board, let alone shared their business information with anyone outside. So they are very fearful of that. I have yet to have a company say that they regret adding an independent board member. Oftentimes, like Cindy said, it goes from 1 to a couple years later, them saying, you know what, it actually was so beneficial that maybe we need somebody with expertise in e-commerce, or, whatever it may be where you're trying to expand your business. The succession planning never stops. Again, working on the next phase of management is very important for the board to have their finger on at all times. Diversity, we'll have healthy discussions, and like I said, board meetings, like Cindy said, should not just be you iterating like all of the information for what happened in the past quarter to the board or to the advisory board. You should be getting questions from them, getting knowledge from them. You should be getting something back from them. And I think that also is helpful with the review, the performance review. If in the performance review, you're seeing that like, hey, you know what, I can't really think of what this person did over this year to actually add and help us out, maybe it's time to replace that person when their term is up. Does anyone have any questions or anything that you want to add? Cindy or Brendan, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
I think I covered everything.
All right.
All right.
I know
We're
it's
here too.
lunchtime. We'll stick around for a little while, but I know it's lunchtime, so everyone should get out there. Thank you for coming.